and see the waves of love come washing over me. The tide to rise above the structures of my see the waves of love come washing over me. The tide to rise above the structures of my is an eloquent seduction. Here in my head is a will to have my way.
Well, welcome to the second hour of A World of Difference tonight here every Monday night between 7 and 10 with me, Roger Williams. That was Evermore by Ironson from the CD In Chances of Light, and for the next 40 minutes or so we'll be finding out more about this remarkable work from its creator Hugh Carswell, who gave up a high-flying job in the city to live a basic life on the Scottish island of Jura. Over a period of years he renovated a cottage on the island and along the way created some of the finest new music I've heard for a long time. In Chances of Light is a triumph, symphonic in its scope and at times quite breathtakingly beautiful. It's music with a big hinterland that encompasses family heritage, geography and a look at personal values. I spoke to Hugh via Skype a few days ago and I put it to him that in the final analysis, this work is about self-discovery.
Yeah, that's right. Wow, what an intro. I don't quite know how to follow that. Yes, it was, I've got this connection with this amazing place in Scotland called the Isle of Jura. And since I was born, I've been brought up here for holidays. I was brought up in the Midlands, actually, in Rugby. My dad was a Scot and always, he was a teacher. He brought us up for these long holidays every summer to this crumbled down little cottage on this remote island. And really, it was probably, when I look back on it now, only a matter of time until I gave in to the inevitable, I guess, of wanting to come and live here.
It's a deeply personal album, isn't it? That's for sure. And did you ever have any idea when you played those first few notes of what became the initial piece on the album, when you played those simple piano notes, where this would end up?
Well, I didn't. I had no idea where it would end up at all, where I'm here now, and ultimately, you know, perhaps the most important thing is I've ended up sort of getting married and having a baby and all this sort of stuff. So I never imagined that would happen. But I don't know. I mean, it sounds maybe a bit sort of weird to describe it, but I do remember when those sort of notes came out. I was down in London, and I sort of knew they had some sort of significance, perhaps just significance to me and no one else, but it actually sort of felt like they were somehow communicating something from this place called Jura, and it almost felt like I was sort of being called to this place. At least the music was sort of reminding me of this place sufficiently enough to make me start to think, well, maybe I could give up my job and maybe I could move away and all this sort of stuff. So they actually had obviously quite a lot of sort of power over my life. Then, you know, once I'd made that decision, everything sort of started to fall into its own place without me really being able to control the direction of it that clearly. I sort of turned up here basically and trusted that the island would take care of me. And actually I still sort of believe that to this day. I mean, obviously it's not just the island, it's the people here. I've always had family here. I've always known this place as somewhere where I can come and be accepted and be cared for. It's a very sort of close-knit community, and you really sort of sense that you're not alone, even though you may spend a lot of your time alone, if that makes sense.
What also makes sense is what you're saying about the religious experience. There's something almost biblical about giving up your earthly possessions and going to a remote island. I mean, you sold your Aston Martin to the Prime Minister of Kuwait and used the proceeds to fund what you've done. I mean, that's an extraordinary story in itself.
Yeah, that is quite funny. You couldn't really make it up. I was actually really worried because I had this, it was a sort of classic Aston Martin, and I do actually even now have the occasional moment where I regret selling that. But I, as you do with these cars, it was with a dealer trying to sell it for me, and actually for quite a long time it wasn't being sold, and I was really worried because I was sort of basically staking a huge amount on the funds that I could release from that selling that car, and that I'd worked it all out that basically selling that car would buy all the building materials I needed for building the house here, which at the time I thought, and I still do think it's quite a good trade-off really, but for a while the car wasn't being sold. Eventually I got a phone call from the dealer saying, you'll never guess what, apparently the Prime Minister of Kuwait is a collector of Aston Martins, and he had contacted Aston Martin looking for precisely the model of car that I had, and put some money down, which is great. So that actually was like the green light to me really cracking on with placing the order, buying materials and all that sort of stuff. So it felt like the right thing to do. I guess you could say it was like a biblical story, but it certainly, I look on it as, in a way, it was just the most amazing opportunity to be able to do that. Coming to this place is just, it's so rich in everything else, perhaps not material things, but just the ability to live here and the quality of life, and actually you really don't need very much money here at all, which again was part of my plan. You know, it isn't like you're giving up things to go into poverty, you're giving up things to improve your life.
Well, it's a different kind of richness, I suppose, isn't it? Something like that. Can we move to the music, which is achingly beautiful at times and deep, as I say, deeply, deeply personal. But felt to me like How Strongly I Felt was almost a pivotal song on the CD. It's got this remarkably beautiful line, and it's about your father, and you use the image of the walled garden to explore that. Now I see why I didn't know how strongly I felt you. I just went, wow, when I read that.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, that was, yes, I mean, it is acutely personal, really. When I first sort of came up here, my dad was alive, and I think, but he had been diagnosed with a incurable illness, so I think we knew he had anywhere between 3 months and 3 years to live. And it was amazing, actually, having given up my sort of busy job down in London. It was the first winter that I was here that he obviously took a turn for the worst. And because I had this newfound sort of freedom, I basically took out, I think it was 3 or 4 months, just to go down and be with my mum and him and look after him. So that, I guess, was a time that all of us at some point will go through in our lives. And yeah, some thoughts and some music came out of that.
Come and go. The presence slowly parts. Break it over and I'll make a start. Yeah, yeah. Far below the currents flow. Not a mission, not a man could tell. I didn't know how strongly I felt it. I labored hard to build walls all around it, encased inside, too big for me to understand it. I didn't know how strongly I felt. Deviate. It's easy to deny. Open the eyes, loosen the songs, and be more real. I didn't know how strongly I felt it. I labored hard to build walls all around it, encased inside, too big for me to understand it. I didn't know how strongly I felt. Sorry for my quick tongue, blind eyes. Now I see why I didn't know how strongly I felt. You.
I mean, my dad is the connection with Jura, so, and actually in this cottage, I mean, I'm sitting here now in my studio in the cottage, and it was my grandfather, actually, worked in the shipyard in Port Glasgow, and he was a very sort of practical man. And he, I think, was the last person in our family who did sort of major sort of repairs to the house, you know. So I was always really aware of, when I was doing work on the place, that there was a sort of, you know, it was a sort of family tradition. And my dad wasn't the most practical of men at all, actually. But all our holidays, he would be up a ladder or painting something or trying to fix something. So, yeah, Jura has all this relationship with him, I suppose, really sort of wrapped up in it. My dad's grandfather, so he was a Scot based in Port Glasgow, worked in the shipyard. My other grandfather, in some respects, you know, would be the complete polar opposite. He was an academic, he was a writer, a poet. He went to Cambridge, King's College. He was a choral scholar at King's College. So in a funny sort of way, I guess the music is a bit of a sort of, you know, if you imagine the combination of a working class shipyard worker and a Cambridge academic and put them together, then maybe what I do is the result.
Well,
but yes, the Ironson, I mean, my grandfather, my mum's side, was called Hugh Ironson Fawcett. And I always liked, ever since I was a boy, I really liked the word and the name Ironson. And when I came to doing the music, I wanted it just to be something a bit removed from just me. I don't know quite why, just to make the whole thing a bit bigger, or, you know, maybe easier just to talk about. So the name Ironson just came up in my mind, and I sort of ran with it.
Take hold, my child. Take hold of me. You're too high, too low. It's too bright to see. We walk along a path, so many voices calling us away. Pressure of time, self-imposed exile from a gentle place to stay. I'll give you my rushing. I'll give you my still. I'll give you my lowlands. I'll give you my hills. Take hold, my child. Take hold of me. You're too fast, too slow. You're too blind to be. Silence descends like manna feeding, getting deeper every day. Internal observations exercise the ghosts of yesterday. I'll give you my rush. I'll give you my still. I'll give you my lowlands. I'll give you my
I've been out with microphones recording storms or the sea or stones or rocks or my father's bicycle that was just rusting in the shed. We got some lovely sounds out of that. And the shipping forecast. It was quite fun actually working with Steve, who did all the percussion on the album. And he was just wonderful to work with and very sort of open-minded, and he took whatever I threw at him, and I'd be sort of sending him samples. I'd be sort of recording samples of Jura stones of 10 different sizes, you know, and sending them through to him saying, can you integrate this in the percussion? You know? He was really up for it, so it was good, yeah.
Before I found out who the percussionist was, I was thinking to myself, my word, there's a very sensitive percussionist on there. And then I discover that it's Steve Jansen, who is David Sylvian's brother, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yes, yeah.
And he was he was inconveniently placed in New Hampshire. So how did you make that work?
It was quite funny working with Steve because he's a real urban sort of guy, but I've always absolutely loved his drumming. He just sprang into my mind when I was thinking about, you know, who I'd like to work on this record. And one of his conditions of getting involved was that he could sort of do it from anywhere. I initially had a sort of slightly romantic idea that I wanted all the musicians to come to Jura and record their pieces here, which would have been lovely. But dealing with, thankfully, some of the sort of calibre of some of the musicians who are on the record, I soon realised that actually if they said yes, then I should just, you know, grab them with whatever conditions they had. And Steve certainly wasn't up for coming to a Scottish island. We worked on it all remotely. At the time, I had a ridiculously slow internet connection through a sort of dial-up. If people can remember what that was like.
I certainly
you had
can.
to sort of ring it on your computer and it did the sort of modem sound. And basically, initially, I was transferring things to him via that. Then we got a slightly faster broadband, but everything on the island comes by microwave. So it's just, the whole process was quite laborious. It would take me about 2 days to upload a single track to him. My route into Steve was actually through the David Sylvian albums. I've been a really massive fan of his solo work particularly. So I ended up getting these wonderful recordings back from him, which was wonderful, and almost all the better for the fact that they were a little bit of a surprise, you know, to me. I hadn't been there when he'd actually been doing the recording.
I think it's extremely sensitive percussion, both on the very quiet sections of what you produce, and he can kind of ramp it up a bit, can't he, when that's needed as well. Had you had personal contact with him before you approached him about this, or was it just your admiration of the work that he'd done with David Sylvian and others?
From somewhere, I was just, you know, in my mind thinking, well, who would be the best person for this? And I knew I needed really sort of sensitive and someone who could, like you say, ramp it up a bit, but actually ultimately just be interesting and sensitive to the other arrangements that were happening. And Steve's name just came out, and I've never had any contact with him at all. I just looked up online and found the name of his manager and rang up.
I'm trying to imagine the conversation between Steve and his manager or agent after the phone call's been made. He says, he wants what?
Yeah, well, no. There's this mad guy on an island. I really love drummers. I mean, it's so difficult as a sort of modern, you know, the drummer to sort of have a style or that is recognisable. And I always recognise him playing on things. There aren't that many people I can think of. You know, maybe Stuart Copeland is a great one, or Keith Moon, but, you know, in terms of sort of an actually really original style, and I think Steve is just exactly that. So I love the fact he's on the record.
The Scottish Ensemble, did you just ring them up as well? I could do with a string ensemble on the album. Are you up for it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend over on the mainland who used to take pity on me a little bit in my hour's need, a bit of a down and out in my little damp cottage. And she runs a sort of an arts sort of venue over on the mainland, which is brilliant. It's a place called Creer. Yeah, I do remember actually their chief exec, who was a very nice lady called Elizabeth Andrews, and suggesting to her that I would love, them to play on my record. But at that time, it was obviously very early on, because it was actually 3 years later until I was ready for the strings. So I remember plucking up my courage again and ringing her up and saying, "Do you remember a slightly drunk guy 3 years ago who suggested you might play on his record?" And thankfully she did. And that's been a wonderful relationship. And John Morton, who's their artistic director and main sort of first violin of the band, and we're now really good friends, and they're really just wonderful string players. I sort of wrote all the string parts for the record. They just work with all this sort of incredible music by some of the sort of finest composers known to man, so I was rather put in my place thinking, oh, blimey, I've got to write these string parts for them. But in the end, I just sort of trusted myself and wrote all the parts here. And yeah, we had a weekend up in Dundee, actually, recording all the string parts up there with them.
So what was your musical education? It doesn't sound like it came from your dad particularly, but you played 2 or 3 instruments on the CD, on the recordings. You presumably provided the Scottish Ensemble with a score. Tell me about your musical education here.
Yeah, well, I just sort of make it up as I go along, really. I wouldn't really class myself as a brilliant musician at all, but I can usually sort of pick an instrument up and sort of get something out of it, which in some respects, living on a remote island is quite a useful ability. Yes. And likewise with the writing the strings. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but ever since the first sort of tunes came out for the record, I'd always heard the harmonies and the string parts in my head. Mm-hmm. So when I was doing this building site stuff, almost sort of subconsciously, the string arrangements were sort of happening, and I knew all the string parts and all the harmonies. So when it really came down to it, all it's a matter of doing is just sort of programming it into the software, so you can write the score and just test things. But yeah, they're mainly sort of 5-part harmonies on all the strings.
Now, we've mentioned Steve Jansen, we've mentioned the Scottish Ensemble. Dudley Phillips, tell me about him. We didn't ought to leave him out.
Dudley is a lovely guy, great bass player, works mainly in jazz. And actually the link to Dudley came through Steve, and that they had worked together in the live band of Anya Garbrek. I don't know if you know Anya Garbrek. I think she's the daughter of Jan.
Well, Jan I know about, Anna I don't.
She made one of my favourite records ever, actually. Beautiful album, and I think, in fact, I went to see them play at the Jazz Cafe in Camden, not knowing that it was Steve and not knowing that it was Dudley. So, but yes, we ended up recording Dudley down south again because the logistics of getting them up here was too difficult, and had a great few days at a guy called Ralph Salmon's studio. And yeah, that worked out really well. And Dudley's feels like a real sort of kindred spirit. He was really helpful actually in the mixing process for the album, because I was just up here mixing it all myself really, and it's quite, the combination of instruments is quite unusual with the big string orchestra and all the other elements. So in some respects slightly out of my territory, and a lot of experimentation was going on, and Dudley was really sort of helpful in giving me his sort of opinions about things in the production of the album. So yeah, he was a great guy.
senseless blue. Write down all the words I know to be true. Shimmering shadows, I can't see your face. Distant as a memory, vivid as a taste.
Is it the record that you hoped it would be, or do you listen to it and think to yourself, oh, I wish I'd done that a bit differently, or a bit more of this or a bit less of that? Because, I mean, you're a perfectionist.
I'm really happy with it. The process you go through is been interesting talking to you about it, actually, but you don't really have, in some respects, control over it. You know, things have introductions have happened, things have happened, and other musicians become involved. Things in life change, you know, everything sort of changes during the course of making something like this. So it's been a really interesting process. And I think the album, I've always felt, it for me, works at its best when it's been listened to here on Jura. You know, if I'm driving the car or something, for me, it just absolutely makes sense. So hopefully for people who don't live here, it might sort of convey a bit of that, the essence of what this place is like. So, but yeah, I'm very, very happy with it. But now, you know, very firmly moving on to working on new things as well. So.
Do you ever see this being performed live or not, or is that not?
Well, I would absolutely love to do that. One of the bits of advice I'd give any aspiring musicians is you know, it's not a sort of hugely sensible idea making a record with a sort of 12-piece string ensemble and, you know, a huge ensemble of players, because the minute you want to do something live, then it becomes a very, very difficult and expensive thing to do. We've done well with the record, actually, but I've been hoping that we would have opportunities. I'm still on the lookout for opportunities for doing it live, because I would absolutely love to do that. Funnily enough, the way the record turned out is that I haven't really wanted to to tone down the music by just doing pieces on just a piano or a guitar. I just, maybe it's being an idealist, but I'd still love to be on a stage with the whole band, doing it. So hopefully one of these days we will get that opportunity.
And I'd love to see that one day myself. I'd be the first in line for a ticket, Hugh. There's no question about it. Now, well, look, thanks very much for your time, Hugh. It is very much appreciated. And I think it's a wonderful piece of work.
Spring
And that's how the album ends. It's the final track on the album. It's called Spring Will Come. You may have noticed some little sounds in the background there from time to time, and this is an album that repays repeated listening, because the more you listen to it, the more you hear. And there are all kinds of little sounds and effects from the island of Jura which give the album really a very, very special nature indeed. So on that particular track, for example, the clock and the fire crackling as sounds from the cottage in winter. The spring lambs were recorded in the field just up the road from Knockrome. The distant flute tune is borrowed from my grandfather Bobby's song Moira of Jura's Isle, which they still occasionally sing at Cayley's here. I was feeling like there was an element missing from this song, and the idea of overlaying Bobby's chorus came to him in a dream. He wrote it when he was courting my grandmother on Jura before the First World War. There is so much to admire about this album. Do you get the impression I like it? Over the last couple of years, I've chosen an album of the year at the end of the year. Well, I don't have to go much further, I think, than In Chances of Light by Ironson. I was talking to Hugh Carswell, and a very good evening to you, Hugh, and to Jane up there on the island of Jura. Now, Christmas is coming up. Sorry to mention the C word, but wouldn't that make a good Christmas present for people who love music that they may not have heard before, and they just plug it on the CD player and go, wow. The distribution is by Burning Shed Records, so you can get it via them. But the simplest thing to do, and I'm on that website right now myself, ironson.com, IANSON, ironsonmusic.com, ironsonmusic.com, IANSON music.com. You'll see a little picture of In Chances of Light and a wonderful little drawing of the island of Jura. And you can click straight from there to Take Hold, which is one of the tracks I played in two parts, in fact, during the course of that interview. The tracks we heard were Evermore, which is dedicated to his now wife, Jane, How Strongly I Felt, which is the song about his father, Take Hold, which is something about the spirit of Jura, Fire Mercy Me, and Spring Will Come. It's an absolute triumph. I commend it to you. Buy it for your friends and relatives for Christmas. ironsonmusic.com. You will find it, or just put in Chances of Light into a search engine of your choice, and you will find out all the details. And once again, thanks to Hugh Carswell, who was very generous with his time a couple of weeks ago when I recorded that interview. Maybe all that time he was working in the city in a high-flying job in his with his Aston Martin. He was waiting for his real life to begin.
Any minute now, my ship is coming in. I'll keep checking the horizon, and I'll stand on the bow and feel the waves come crashing down, down, down on me. And you say, be still, my love. Open up your heart, let the light shine in. Don't you understand? I already have a plan. I'm waiting for my real life to begin. When I woke today, suddenly nothing happened. But in my dreams I slew the dragon and down this beaten path, up this cobbled lane, walking in my old footsteps once again. And you say, just be here now, forget about the past, your mask is wearing thin. Just let me throw one more dice, I know that I can win. I'm waiting for my real life to begin. Any minute now, my ship is coming in. I'll keep checking the horizon, and I'll check my machine. It's sure to be that call. Happen soon, soon, oh so very soon. It's just the times are lean, and you say, be still, my love. Open up your heart, let the light shine in. And don't you understand? I'm waiting for my real life to begin. Hey, on a clear day, I can see for a long way. On a clear day, I can see. See for a long way.
That sort of felt apt, ready to follow the sequence that we just heard from Hugh Carswell and Ironson and In Chances of Light. That's Colin Hay, he of Men of Work fame and Waiting for My Real Life to Begin. Some very positive reaction to the interview there, that's for sure, especially from the Gazookie Man down there in deepest Cornwall. And once again, to find out more about that, go to ironsonmusic.com or just put In Chances of Light into a search engine of your choice and you'll find out all the details. In the third and final hour, we're going to be scaring ourselves witless with some, frankly, terribly scary music along the Halloween theme, or pursuing the Halloween theme. But in the meantime, David Lacey's been in touch. He of BBC Introducing fame. He's beginning to make a bit of a name for himself, and he is on at the Malt Cross in Nottingham from 9 o'clock tomorrow night. The Wagon and Horses, the Mansfield in Arnold from 8:45 on Saturday, and the Old Volunteer, Burton Road in Carlton on Wednesday the 12th of November. Free to get into all of those. Now, the Malt Cross has just been reopened after an extensive refurbishment, and it's a place I fully intend to get down to before too long. Thank you for getting in touch, David, and looking forward to playing some of your music in weeks to come here on A World of Difference. Just a little footnote. I'm very, 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 very distantly related to Hugh Carswell. It turns out that Matthew Wildman's wife, Sarah, on her grandma's side, is a Darroch, and the Darrochs come from Jura. And way back in Hugh Carswell's own lineage, there are also some Darrochs. So there we are. It's my Uncle Hugh. What, me bask in reflected glory? Never. Evening, Cookie. Here you are.
The Brookside boys had their fill of me, been snapping up the People's Gallery. Kevin, Hassan, William and Tom Kelly, the spirit, the faults and the history. And I'm going back. There's no place like home when you're ragged and weary. And I'm going back. I'm going back to Brewtown. Charm me with his grace. I was snared in Newstead's firm embrace, but the lure of home soon broke the spell. Oh Georgie boy, I wish thee well. And I'm going back. There's no place like home when you're ragged and weary. And I'm going back. I'm going back to Brewtown. The sweet allure of a sacred land that draws me with divine command can never hold this drifting lamp, a river dirty Nottingham. And I'm going back. There's no place like home when you're ragged and weary. And I'm going back. I'm going back to Brewtown. I'm longing for her industries, that market town mentality, the black old toll gate breweries, dead time bird in the Applebee. And I'm going back. There's no place like home when you're ragged and weary. And I'm going back. I'm going back to Brewtown.
Demenyoma liko jalambulo, demenyoma le sigidiala, demenyoma liko jalambulo, demenyoma le sigidiala.
Terima fila bembalile ay demenyoma, balima fila bembalile ay demenyoma, sigi nyoma fila bembalile demenyoma, chena muso bembalile ay demenyoma.
Demenyoma liko jalambulo, demenyoma le sigidiala, demenyoma liko jalambulo, demenyoma le sigidiala.
Jamana fila bembalile ay demenyoma, jamana dinu bembalile ay demenyoma. Mama dumbalo teriala ay demenama, temenje dinke jigiala ay demenama. Demenyoma bimogoya, demenyoma le kola jalani. kelengele wa kelengele ni anye kelengele wala tumani ke